Paradise by Edna O'Brien, third part. Gold's eggs, already shelled, were brought to the table. The yolks a very delicate yellow. "Where are the shells?" the fat lady, veiled in crepe, asked. The shells had to be brought. They were crumbled almost to a powder, but were brought anyhow. "Where are the nests?" she asked. It missed. It was something they might have laughed at had they heard, but the wind had risen, and they were all getting up and carrying things indoor. The wind was working up to something. It wiped the geranium flowers from their leaves and crazed the candle flames so that they blew this way and that in the glass sconces. That night, their love-making had all the sweetness and all the release that earth must feel with the long-awaited rain. He was another man now, with another voice, loving and private and incantatory. His coldness, his dismissal of her, hard to believe in. Perhaps if they quarreled, their quarrels, like their love-making, would bring them closer. But they never did. He said he never had a quarrel with any of his women. She added that he left his wives once it got to that point. He did not say so, but she felt that must have been so, because he had once said that all his marriages were happy. He said there had been fights with men, but these were decent. He had more rapport with men. With women, he was charming, but it was charm devised to keep them at bay. He had no brothers and no son. He had had a father who bullied him and held his inheritance back for longer than he should. This she got from one of the men who had known him for 40 years. His father had caused him to suffer badly. She didn't know in what way, and she was unable to ask him because it was information she should never have been given a hint of. After their trip to the Roman caves, the children came home ravenous. One child objected because the meal was cold. The servant, sensing a certain levity, told her master, and the story sent shrieks of laughter around the lunch table. It was repeated many times. He called to ask if she had heard. He sometimes singled her out in that way. It was one of the few times the guests could glimpse the bond between them. Yes, she had heard. "Sweet, sweet," she said. The word occurred in her repertoire all the time now. She was learning the language and phoning. Far from home, from where the cattle grazed, the cattle had fields to roam and a water tank near the house. The earth around the water tank, always churned up, always mucky from their trampling there. They were farming people, had their main meal in the middle of the day, had rows. Her father vanished one night after supper, said he was going to count the cattle, brought a flash lamp, never came back. Others sympathized, but she and her mother were secretly relieved. Maybe he drowned himself in one of the many bog lakes or changed his name and went to a city. At any rate, he did not hang himself from a tree or do anything ridiculous like that. She lay on her back as instructor brought her across the pool, his hand under her spine. The sky above an innocent lightless blue, with the streamers where the jets had passed over. She let her head go right back, she thought. If I were to give myself to it totally, it would be a pleasure and an achievement, but she couldn't. Our Argoroba hung from trees like blackened banana skins. The banana picked them in the early morning and packed them in sacks for winter fodder. In the barn where these sacks were stored, there was a smell of decay and an olive press. In the linen room next to a pleasant smell of linen, the servant used too much bleach. Clothes lost their sharpness of color after one wash. She used to sit in one or another of the rooms and read. She went to the library for a book. He was in one of the Regency chairs that was covered with ticking, as on a throne. One chair was real and one a copy, but she could never tell them apart. "I saw you yesterday, and you nearly went under," he said. I still have several lessons to go, she said, and went as she intended, but without the book that she had come to fetch. His daughter, by his third marriage, had an 18-inch waist. On her first evening, she wore a white trouser suit. She held the legs out, and the small pleats, when open, were like a concertina. At table, she sat next to her father and gazed at him with appropriate awe. He told the story of a dangerous leopard hunt. They had lobster as a special treat. The lobster tails, curving from one place, set into the next, reached far more cordially than the conversation. She tried to remember something she had read that day. She found that by memorizing things, she could amuse them at the table. The gorilla resorts to eating, drinking, or scratching to bypass anxiety, she said later. They all laughed. You don't say, he said with a sneer. It occurred to her that if she were to become too confident, she would not want that either, or else he had said it to reassure his daughter. There were moments when she felt confident. She knew in her mind the movements she was required to make in order to pass through the water. She could not do them, but she knew what she was supposed to do. She wore her hands under the table, trying to make deeper and deeper forays into the atmosphere. No one caught her at it. The word plankton would not let go of her. She saw dense masses of it, green and serpentine, enfeebling her fingers. She could almost taste it. His last wife had stitched a backgammon board in green and red. Very beautiful it was. The fat woman played with him after dinner. They carried on the game from one evening to the next. They played very contentedly. The woman wore a different arrangement of rings at each sitting, and he never failed to admire and compliment her on them. To those not endowed with beauty, he was particularly charming. Her curling tongues fused the entire electricity system. People rushed out of their bedrooms to know what had happened. He did not show his anger, but she felt it. Next morning, they had to send a telegram to summon an electrician. In the telegram office, two men sat, one folding the blue pieces of paper, one applying gum with a narrow brush, and laying thin borders of white over the blue and pressing down with his hands. On the white strips, the name and address had already been printed. A motorcycle was indoors to protect the tires from the sun, or in case it might be stolen. The men took turns when a telegram had to be delivered. She saved one or the other of them a journey because a telegram from a departed guest arrived while she was waiting. It simply said, "Adore it, Harry." Guests invariably forgot something, and in their thank you letters mentioned what they had forgotten. She presumed that some of the hats stuck into one another and laid on the stone ledge were hats forgotten or thrown away. She had grown quite attached to a green one that had lost its ribbons. The instructor asked to be brought to the souvenir shop. He brought a glass ornament and a collar for his dog. On the way back, a man at the petrol station gave one of the children a bird. They put it in a chapel, made a nest for it. The servant threw its nest and all into the waste paper basket. That night at supper, the talk was of nothing else. He remembered his fish story, and he told it to the new people who had come, how one morning he had to abandon his harpoon because the lines got entangled, and next day when he went back, he found that the shark had retreated into a cave and had two great lumps of rock in his mouth, where obviously he had bitten to free himself. That incident had a profound effect on him. "Is the boat named after your mother?" she asked of his daughter. Her mother's name was Beth, and the boat was called Miss Beth. "He never said," the daughter replied. "She always disappeared after lunch. It must have been to accommodate them. Despite the heat, they made a point of going to his room, and made a point of inventiveness. She tried a strong green stock to excite him, marveling at it, comparing him and it. He watched. He could not endure such competition. With her head upside down and close to the tile floor, she saw all the oils and ointments on his bathroom ledge and tried reading the labels backwards. Do I like all this love making? She asked herself. She had to admit that possibly she did not, and it went on too long, that it was involvement, she thought. Involvement and threat. They swapped dreams. It was her idea. He was first. Everyone was careful to humor him. He said in a dream a dog was lost and his grief was great. He seemed to want to say more but didn't, or couldn't. Repeated the same thing, in fact. When it came to her turn, she told a different dream from the one she had meant to tell. A short, uninvolved little dream. In the night, she heard a guest sobbing. In the morning, the same guest wore a flame dressing gown and praised the marmalade, which she ate sparingly. She asked for the number of lessons to be increased. She had 3 a day, and she did not go on the boat with the others. Between lessons, she would walk along the shore. The pine trunks were pale, as if a lathe had put on them. The winds on a winter lathe. In winter, they would move to catch up with friends, business meetings, art exhibitions, to buy presents, to shop. He hated suitcases. He liked clothes to be waiting wherever he went, and they were. She saw a wardrobe with his winter clothes neatly stacked. She saw his frieze cloak and the black astrakhan collar, and she experienced such a longing for that impossible season, that impossible city, and his bulk inside the cloak as they set out in the cold to go to a theater. Walking along the shore, she did the swimming movements in her head. It had got into all her thinking, invaded her dreams. Atrocious dreams about her mother, her father, and one where a lion cubs were surrounded her as she lay on a hammock. The cubs were waiting to pounce the second she moved. The hammock, of course, was unsteady. Each time she wakened from one of those dreams, she felt certain that her cries were the repeated cries of infancy, and it was then she helped herself to the fix she had brought up. He put a handkerchief folded like a letter before her plate at table. On opening it, she found some sprays of fresh mint, white-leafed and cold. He had obviously put in the refrigerator first. She smelled it and passed it around. Then on impulse, she got up to kiss him, and on her journey back nearly bumped into the servant with the tureen soup. So excited was she. Her instructor was her friend. We're winning, he said. He walked from down onward, walked the hills and saw the earth with dew on it. He wore a handkerchief on his head and he nodded over the years, but as he approached the house, he removed this headdress. She met him on one of these morning walks. As it got nearer the time, she could neither sleep nor make love. We're winning. He always said it, no matter where they met. They set out to buy finger bowls. In the glass factory were their thin boys with very white skin who secured pieces of glass with pokers and thrust them into the stoves. The whole place smelled of wood. There was chopped wood in piles, in corners. Circular holes were cut along the top of the wall between the square grated windows. The roof was high, and yet the place was a furnace. 5 kittens with tails like rats lay bunched immobile in a heap. A boy, having washed himself in one of the available buckets of water, took the kittens one by one and dipped them in. She took it to be an act of kindness. Later, he bore a hot blue bubble at the end of a poker and laid it before her. As the flames subsided, it became mauve, and as it cooled more, it was almost colorless. It had the shape of a sea serpent and a naturally long tail. Its color and its finished appearance were an accident, but the gift was clearly intentioned. There was nothing she could do but smile. As they were leaving, she saw him waiting near the motor car, and as she got in, she waved wanly. That night they had asparagus, which is why they went to the trouble to get finger bowls. These were blue with small bubbles throughout, and through the bubbles may have been a defect, they gave to the thick glass an airiness. There was a new dog, a mongrel, in whom he took no interest. He said the servants got new dogs simply because he allotted money for that. But as they were not willing to feed more than one animal, the previous year's dog was either murdered or to put out on the mountain. All these dogs were of the same breed, part wolf. She wondered if when left on the mountains they reverted to being wolves. He said solemnly to the table at large that he would never allow himself to become attached to another dog. She said to him directly, "Is it possible to know beforehand?" He said, "Yes." She could see that she had irritated him. He came 3 times and afterwards coughed badly. She sat with him and stroked his back, but when the coughing took command, he moved her away. He leaned forward, holding a pillow to his mouth. She saw a film of his lungs, orange shades with insets of dark that boded ill. She wanted to do some simple domestic thing like give him medicine, but he sent her away. Going back along the terrace, she could hear the birds. The birds were busy with their song. She met the fat woman. "You have been devoted," the woman said, "and so have I." And they bowed mockingly. An archaeologist had been on a dig where a wooden temple was discovered. "Tell me about your temple," she said. "I would say it's 400 years before Christ," he said. Nothing more. Dry, dry. A boy who called himself Jasper and wore mauve shirts received letters under the name of John. The letters were arranged on the whole table, each person's under a separate stone. Her mother wrote to say that they were anxiously awaiting the good news. She said she hoped they would get engaged first, but admitted that she was quite prepared to be told that the marriage had actually taken place. She knew how unpredictable he was. Her mother managed a poultry farm in England and was compulsive eater. Young people came to ask if Clay Sickle was staying at the house. They were in rags, but it looked as they were rags worn on purpose and for effect. Their shoes were bits of motor tire held up with string. They all got out of the car, though the question could have been asked by any of them. He was on his way back from the pool, and after 2 minutes' conversation, he invited them for supper. He throve on new people. That night they were the ones in the limelight, the 3 unkempt boys and the long-haired girl. The girl had very striking eyes, which she fixed on one man and then another. She was determined to compromise one of them. The boys described their holidays being broke, the trouble that they had with the car, which was owned by a hire purchase firm in London. After dinner, an incident occurred. The girl followed one of the men into the bathroom. "Want to see what you got there?" she said, and insisting on watching while the man peed. She said they would do any kind of fucking he wanted. She said he would be a slob not to try. It was too late to send them away because earlier on they'd been invited to spend the night and beds were put up down in the dining room. The girl was the last to go over there. She started the song. "All around his cock he wears a tricolor rainbow." And she went on yelling it as she crossed the courtyard and went down the steps, brandishing a bottle. In the morning, she determined to swim by herself. It was not that she mistrusted her instructor, but the time was getting closer and she was desperate. As she went to the pool, one of the youths appeared in borrowed white shorts, eating a banana. She greeted him with faltering gaiety. He said it was fun to be out before the others. He had a big head with closely cropped hair, a short neck, and a very large nose. "Beaches are where I most want to be, where it all began," he said. She thought he was referring to creation, and upon hearing such a thing, he laughed profanely. "Let's suppose there is a bunch of kids and you're horsing around with a ball and all your sensory dimensions are working." "What?" she said. "A hard-on." "Oh. Now the ball goes into the sea and I follow and she follows me and take the ball from my hand and a dense rain of energy call it love from me to her and vice versa, reciprocity in other words, blah, blah, blah. Sententious idiot, she thought. Why do people like to have to be kept under his roof? Where is his judgment? Where? She walked back to the house, furious at having to miss her chance to swim.